fix it? Well, the very broken bits of it don't have that capital. The second worry I have is over discussions around the sort of John Lewis idea of mutualising council services. And there seem to be two problems there. And that is, a lot of the sort of mutualisation suggests that they will cut down their costs by squeezing it out, either through flatter management or by exploiting themselves. And this you could get into the area of absolute exploitation, whereby merely to hang on to your job, workers accept wage cuts or accept worse conditions to hold on in there to cut costs. And that's happened in the past. I mean, there's worker cooperatives. I know of one in the 1890s called Bromsgrove Nailmakers that cut out the middleman, cut out the factors that they're often indebted to, and they had a period of time when it was quite good, and then handmade nails went out the window, and they constantly exploited themselves by working longer hours and accepting lower pay to keep in there. So I think that there's a danger with that. And the final problem I have with the mutuals is the recent history, in that if a mutual does well, and I hold capital in it, or equity, sorry, in it, what happens when people offer me money for that, which is what happened with the building societies? How are we, if we're going to actually have a success in that area of the big society, how are you going to protect it in the future? That if it is successful, that those things aren't brought up by private business and then exploited.
Thanks, Chris. I can see another hand at the back.
Lambourne. I used to teach on DD 100. I'm very interested in the points just made about how mutuals be demutualised. My preferred metaphor, I suppose, for government is that of play. I'm prepared to support almost any initiative in government if one takes it as a form of play. In other words, we want to see what the outcomes are and then change our play. But that metaphor requires spectators, it requires means of making judgments. And I'm unhappy, I'm going to introduce a new area for conversation here. I'm unhappy about the way we see what happens. It's reported to us by a press. And this press is one that I am less inclined to trust now than before. I see movements between government and press that aren't pleasing me, and I don't think they're going to let me see much of the play that's going on. I wonder if members of our panel could pursue the metaphor of play in their studies. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Is there somebody else?
Not so long ago, we were told there's no such thing as society, and this idea of the big societies come from the same party. Now, it was very intriguing, and Mike earlier on says we need to look at the concepts, and that's the way I tend to look at these things, being a bit simplistic. So, do you think this thing of the big societies is essentially ideological? And if it is, can it fit across the political spectrum? Because there's so many different things in there. I mean, it's essentially normative. You have to have an idea of how society should be. Now, I don't quite know where it could fit, because it could almost fit across the ideological spectrum, I think.
Okay, I was going to just follow on a couple of the points. I mean, we'll answer them directly, but I also want people to think, I'll answer this as a sort of future question, which is it's partly on the question of what the ideological provenance of the third way is. But, you know, if you're Ed Miliband and you're faced with the government, you know, coming forward with this idea, how do you respond, you know, to this debate? You know, what's your, you know, do you dismiss it as merely political rhetoric, or do you engage with it and then in some way, you know, risk your political credibility possibly? But anyway, that's a sort of question in the background. I'll just ask for some responses to the questions you've had. Mike, yeah.
Have a go at a couple. You can always speak with a slightly looser tongue later in the evening, can't you? The press is a serious issue. It's a serious issue here and elsewhere. I think it's probably true that the Tea Party movement in the US wouldn't exist without Fox News, for example. More controversially, it may not exist unless there was a black occupant of the White House, I suspect. The press in this country, the red top tabloids are not going to be talking about the big society. They'll talk about Katie Price and her potential role in some other society, and there is a market for that, and that is fine, but they are not newspapers. So what views come through, what views get represented, the revolving door between key positions in the tabloid press in particular and government, I think is interesting and worrying in some ways. The point on cooperatives, I think the points are well made, Chris. Diddy 203 representative, excellent. Anyone else in the room? No, just you and me. Okay, good. And Jeff. And one or two others. Ideologies, a quick offering on that. Graham, as you know well from your PhD work, well, there are different views on this, aren't there? I mean, one answer would be that there are echoes of left, right, centre and other ideologies in some or other version of the big society. Are there not? The right echoes distrust of the central state, self-reliance, pragmatism, suspicion of grand theories, suspicious of big claims about abstract rights. You know, we're going back here to people like Edmund Burke in arguments with Paine and others, back a long way. So there's certainly right echoes, potentially in the role of the market as well. There are left echoes, localism, pluralism, associationalism, fraternity, decentralisation, some community talk, echoes especially with the kind of versions of Christian socialism and other mainstream versions of British socialism. Liberal ideas, robust localism, self-reliance again, green ideas, localism, activism, overtones of sustainability in some of this, if you squint a bit and look really hard. I suspect the answer to the question might be that ideology is absolutely not dead, but we're not quite sure what ideologies are in play. There are a series of overlapping and flexible hybrid ideological positions at work here, and there's lots of ground that on which claims from different traditional ideological positions can be staked. And this might mean that from the centre-left, if Ed Miliband isn't thinking about how to outflank the Conservative Party or the coalition on the idea of the big society with some similar notion that somehow captures instincts or popularity that the idea of the big society doesn't, well, he should be thinking that. I think it's wrong just to blanketly to be opposing it in a blanket way.
Can I kind of follow on from that? I mean, Mike reminded me earlier that kind of in some ways the big society has been superseded because it kind of arose before we kind of then came into the kind of big budget deficit, we're all in this together kind of discourse really. And I think that's kind of the sort of timing is actually quite interesting. I think there is a bit of everything in there still at the moment, and I don't think it's kind of adequately been sort of fleshed out yet. And it's so, for me, it's kind of less, is it, you know, right wing or left wing or centrist or whatever, and it's more how the concept is being used. And the context within which it's being used. And I think what does worry me, as I've kind of said earlier, is that sort of coming together of the budget deficit, we're all in this together, the overspending of New Labour, because it's such an erroneous analysis, and it clearly has an ideological underpinning. The role of the media, absolutely. I mean, Mike's the person to kind of talk about plays and theatre and representation and things like that, so I'm kind of going to leave sort of fairly well alone, but I think we're absolutely right to be sceptical of the way in which information is mediated to us, whether that's via newspapers or television. But, you know, we should also kind of, we've been sort of talking almost as if kind of social science is something that social scientists do in university, and of course we know that ordinary people do social science all the time. When they kind of critically engage with what the media puts in front of them. And I'm really going to kind of lower the tone now, for which I apologise, but there's an absolutely fantastic quote on the radio this week where a woman was being interviewed about kind of government cuts to benefits and was asked what she thought of it. And she said, "Oh, love, round here we don't even fart because they nick it." And it's a kind of very crude way of sort of analysing what's going on, but actually quite a sophisticated way of analysing it as well. You know, we might not kind of call that social science, but I think there is kind of some social science being done there. To sort of go to the points about the mutuals, I mean, absolutely fascinating. That's clearly your kind of area of expertise, and is certainly not mine, but I thought the points you made were spot on and very interesting, so I'll leave that there.
Just wanted, before Francesco puts himself in the shoes of Ed Miliband, I wanted to take David's idea of play and put it to Francesco. Francesco's the director of a think tank. He's not the rest of us straight academic. And the role of think tanks is to play with ideas. Okay, so I want to know where you're taking the big society.
Yeah, I must say that yes, I three things. Number one, I will not agree completely with Eugene and Mike, but I think that big society, I don't know if it is an ideology, I'm not an academician to say that, but certainly it is a response to a revolutionary, very quick evolution of our economy, of our society, which is triggered by a technological discontinuity that we cannot ignore. We live in an era now that has been revolutionized by something which is probably similar to the invention of the press machine, you know, that triggered the Renaissance. If information is power, somebody said that information is power, it has got some consequence that now, thanks to the information communication technologies, we are distributing information. I know that information is not knowledge. I know that some of the information that we are distributing is not of good quality, but certainly the explosion of information, the sharp decrease of the cost of accessing, transmitting, and elaborating information must have a consequence on the structure of power. And in this sense, the idea of distributing power, which is, I think, at least this is my interpretation of big society, is something which is not only just, but probably we will find that is irresistible in the next years. So this is on the ideological front. However, I must also say that we must be very pragmatic, and I'm going to Ed Miliband, and also to the, by the way, to the center left in Italy. If we agree, and it seems that even in the DNA of the new Labour, they sort of agree that, in fact, big society, or we can invent a new word for it. This trend is a trend that responds to a technological and economic revolution. We must also recognize that this thing will not happen at the same pace everywhere. Again, it's not something that you want to do with some big reform, because reform are, an instrument of the past. It will happen at different speed in different places. I do not completely agree with Mike when he says a big society will happen in the very long term. We just did a think tank, this study on the future of universities, and we discovered that there are already, even in Italy, universities with the same amount of resources, with the same regulation, and even in the same territorial context, are doing much better than others, and that they are probably ready to have a much bigger autonomy. So in a sense, a big society is also about giving autonomy, not being a little bit simplistic. And therefore, there is some value that you can generate even in the short term, but you must be pragmatic. You must recognize where big society can happen, where big society cannot happen. And where it cannot happen, you still need a state. A state is not just a regulator, evaluator of performance of big society. It's also something that takes over where big society will not work to guarantee some minimum, even more minimum rights of citizens. Number 3, for Ed Miliband, this is also for center left, I would say I agree with you, I want big society to happen, but then I challenge David Cameron to really make big society to happen, which is the same thing that we are sort of advising the center-left to say that fiscal federalism is a good idea, but really to challenge then Northern League and again Berlusconi, this guy that we do not want to mention, to make this thing to happen. This would be my advice to Emilio, but he will not take it.
Great. It's a challenge to David Cameron and Mr. Berlusconi. That's what we want. Now, I'm a bit conscious of the time because Francesco has to get going to Florence tomorrow and has to get the train quite shortly. But does anybody want to make a last contribution, as it were? Anybody dying to say something? On Berlusconi, David Cameron, Miliband. Okay, can I thank the panel very much for a very stimulating and lively debate. I hope you all enjoyed it. This is the first, we hope there's going to be other discussions from the faculties from not only social science, and a chance, you know, for academics and students to meet, and because the nature of our university doesn't happen so often, and I hope you're not too disappointed there are no beards, sandals and you know, corduroys here, but it's been a good debate. Thanks very much, and hope to see you again shortly. Thanks a lot.